Hi, welcome to this week's Authors Love Readers podcast, where we delve into the stories behind the stories. We're asking authors questions, some of them fun, some of them serious, and from their answers, you're going to learn things you never knew about the people who write the stories you love. My name is Patricia McLinn. I'm your host and designated question asker.
I'm Shelley Adina, and I'm an author who loves readers.
Now, let's start the show. Hi, and welcome to this week's edition of Authors Love Readers podcast. My guest this week is the very patient Shelley Adina, and persistent because we've had some tech issues, but we keep coming back and trying, and we're going to succeed this time. Shelley and I have known each other for a while, online really, and then in February, we had a chance to meet in person at a gathering of indie authors in San Francisco, which was so much fun. Really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed meeting you in person and lots of other conversations. And I want Shelley to tell us about her various writing.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Good morning,
That's why
Pat.
I want you to tell it.
Well, I always tell my students, when you're choosing a pen name, make this decision carefully, because I've had 4, now I'm down to 2. I wish I only had 1, but anyway. So
Wow.
as Shelley Adina, I write steampunk and contemporary romance. And as Adina Senft, I write faith-based fiction about faith communities, so the Amish, the Mennonites, and other kinds of communities.
So tell me about steampunk.
Steampunk is usually defined as high technology in the Victorian age. So what that means is the Victorians would look forward and imagine what the future could look like as far as technology, vehicles, that kind of thing, society. And we contemporary folks look back and imagine what could have been in the past. So it's could have beens both coming and going, and you write that into your fiction. And it's a little different because it's alternate history. It's not what happened, but it's what could have happened.
You're saying you apply it to your fiction, so it could apply to all sorts of fiction?
It could. There's historical fantasy, which is what could have happened. There's futuristic romance and paranormal romance, which is what could happen, but hasn't yet. So it can be applied in various kinds of ways. Steampunk is just sort of specific to the age of steam, which was like 1807 to roughly 1900. After that, you get into Deco Punk and Diesel Punk and all kinds of other fun stuff.
I had not heard of those. That's really interesting, though, because Deco is decorative and steam and diesel. I can see the tech part, but why deco tech?
Well, it's kind of steam is tapering off and diesel is coming in, and sort of the Miss Fisher mysteries, that kind of gloss and high fashion, and it's just the machines are very sleek and futuristic. It's very stylized. And so I figure my steampunk, the grandchildren of my steampunk characters in 1889 are totally going to be having Deco Punk stories.
Okay, so Deco Punk would be what years?
Roughly the 20s, the roaring 20s.
Wow, that would be their grandchildren, not just their children?
Yeah, I haven't figured out the timeline yet.
Okay. I'm doing the math in my head. I think because I'm at the tail end of a large family, and my parents were both at the tail ends of their families. So I have a grandfather who I think was born in the 1870s. I never met him. He was dead before I was born.
Right.
But, yeah. So we have quite the spread. Anyhow, that's a tangent. So what then is in your steampunk stories in particular, what are the stakes? What's the in writers we refer to the story question. So kind of what's driving the story?
In steampunk, there's the element of punk. So there is some subversive element that is driving the story. So, for instance, my 12-book series begins with a woman who is expected to do nothing but pour a cup of tea and make a good marriage. Her punk element is to go to university and become an engineer. And in her
Mm.
efforts to do that, she changes the world. So that's kind of what's at stake in a steampunk novel. It's making your own way in the world, sort of bucking the tide of society's expectations.
What's the name of the series?
Magnificent devices.
Oh, that's cool. What a great title. What's the question that has to be answered to end the book?
Well, there's this cliffhanger problem I have.
Oh, okay.
So the big overarching question in the first 4 books is, will Lady Claire be able to go to university? And then gradually through the next 4, that question is answered, and then a larger question starts appearing. Somebody is out to cause a world war, and who is it?
Ooh.
And so it takes about 4 more books to realize, oh my goodness, here's the solution. And then the last 4 books are the daughter of the arms dealer saying, this is unacceptable. We didn't stop the war. I have to do it.
Wow.
So the focus moves from character to character, and the giant epic arc takes about 12 books to finally wrap up.
When you started, did you know that was the arc?
No, I thought I was writing a single title.
And where in the process of those books did you go, "Oh, okay, I'm here for the long haul"?
Somewhere between 4 and 5, I realized there was a big bad, and I realized who it was. And it's like, okay, this was planted in book 1. I just didn't realize it. And so I took the seeds and made them grow. And 12 books later, that was the harvest.
I don't have one as long as that, but I do know how that happens. I had the first trilogy I wrote, I thought it was a single book, and a friend said to me who'd read it, "You do know this is the middle book of a trilogy." And I was like, "Well, no, because a trilogy has to have 3 books, and I only have 1." But, all those things that were planted, isn't that amazing?
The
You go
brain
back
is a
and you look
mysterious
at it.
thing. Yeah. When I look at J.K. Rowling's books, I think, did she really plan all these things out, or is her brain just on some kind of genius level that
Mm.
these things come into being in subsequent books, but they're clearly planted in book 1?
Yeah, it's so wonderful, though, when you realize, "Oh, that's why that popped up," back here. I don't know whether that's how she operates, but that's how I operate. That there'll be something that you planted unconsciously early on, and then it's like, oh well, of course,
That's why I knew that.
yeah, yeah, and you had no clue at the time. At least I don't. Well, let's backtrack a little bit. We'll come back more to the writing and the books, but I first want to let the listeners get to know you and some fun things. So, what are some surprising jobs you've held?
Well, I was the narcotics clerk for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in the narcotics division.
Wow, cool.
It was really cool. It was the most fun job I ever had.
How did you get that job?
Well, the government at the time has a revolving pool of applications. And so I applied and I got into the steno pool. And then once you're in, you can apply for other jobs. And I saw narcotics come up and I'm like, wow, that's my cup of tea. So I applied for the job and got it. And at the time, there weren't very many female officers in the Mounted Police. And so they would have us clerks do sort of undercover kinds of things.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. Like what?
Well, in one of my books, which is a contemporary romance called Call for Me, the book
Yeah.
opens with a woman in a glass room making an undercover call to manipulate a criminal into being in a certain time and place so that he can be arrested. And that was the kind of thing I used to do. I was the girl in the glass room.
Did you get a lot of training to do that? Or did they just kind of say,
We need
find your own way?
Yeah, we need you. Here's what you say. And they shut the door.
Wow.
But
Now,
you're a writer, so you come up with scenarios and you act them out.
when I started out of college, my first job out of college as a sports writer for a newspaper, first one there, and there weren't a whole lot of female sports writers around at that point. How did you find the guys treated you, or the men, because they probably more senior than you? Was there pushback about a woman being there, or did they accept it? What was the approach?
Well, it was kind of accepted that the clerks would be women, but
Hmm.
there, of course, was a hazing process. Like they ink your phone so that you have your stamp pad, and they ink the receiver so that when you put it to your ear, you have ink all down the side of your face. It was narcotics, and so there were cannabis seeds that they planted in the plants on my desk, and then they arrested me for cultivation. There was the firecracker in the garbage can trick when you're on the phone. So much hazing went on, but if you come through that, and better yet, you do it back to them, then they accepted you and you're sort of part of the team. And if they can't flap you, they know that you're the kind of metal that can support them. And so we were doing
Yeah.
dispatch and all kinds of things. And you have to keep your wits about you when you're in the middle of a giant drug operation and you're calling dispatch.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty fun.
And what books have you used that in? You must have used it in books.
Well, I used it in Call for Me. That was the
You said that one, yeah.
Yeah, and then actually there's a trilogy of books kind of based on or using anecdotes from my career there. So there's Call for Me, Reach for Me, and Dream of Me.
That's terrific. I think that's fascinating. So, but now, if you were not writing, would you still be in that sort of occupation, or?
Well, I immigrated, so I had to leave the mounted police, and you have to be a citizen in order to work for the federal agencies like FBI and DEA, so I couldn't do that. So I went to the district attorney's office, and I was working for the DA, and that lasted almost a year. And then, being Silicon Valley, the computer industry sort of sucks you in. So I did that for the next 20 years.
Oh, wow. And now, does the Silicon Valley experience, does that in any way kind of seep into the steampunk stories, or are they totally separate?
Not really, unless you sort of, the entrepreneur kind of startup mindset, the willingness to work hard because you have a goal, maybe that seeps in just a bit.
Okay. Can you remember a childhood book or books that really kind of opened your eyes to the world of story, and let you dive in and know that you were never really truly going to come out?
There was an author called Elizabeth Goudge who wrote a series of they were intended for children, but they weren't very childlike. The Little White Horse was one. Linnets and Valerians was another. It was such a rich world, and the female young characters, young like under 20, had agency in bringing good to the world. And I just fell into those books and gobbled them up. I loved every single one. In fact, I still have them in my bookcase.
Oh, that's wonderful that you still have them. Yeah. Now, what do you mean they weren't very childlike?
Well, there was, death, and the children had to face, loss of parents, that some of them were abandoned. And so there was no flinching from sort of a Victorian reality. But at the same time, there was so much hope and beauty in the world that they found around them. And the descriptions of food, I mean, I totally used that style in my Amish books because food is really important in Amish stories. So I just totally do an Elizabeth Goudge on the dinner scenes.
When were those books written? Do you know?
Oh, golly, I would say in the 50s and 60s.
Okay, but she was writing about Victorian period or
Well, I think The Little White Horse was set kind of in 1845, 1850 maybe. And one of them was clearly in the 30s. You could sort of tell because they had line art, and you can tell kind of by the costumes that the characters, you can pin it to a year.
That's terrific. So another reader asks about how you feel when the cover does not match the character description. And this reader acknowledges it's a pet peeve of hers. She's curious how authors feel about it.
There is much distress and angst on this topic.
Oh, yeah.
Although I have to say, Hachette gave me just jaw-droppingly beautiful covers. And especially for the Amish ones, they really, really listened because I was their only Amish author, and the art department had no idea. In fact, the first comp for The Wounded Heart, which was the book that kicked off the series, had her in a colonial mob cap. And I'm like, no, they don't wear those in Lancaster County.
Oh, dear.
So I had to send pictures and, this is what this is supposed to look like. And they did a photo shoot, and like right down to whether the ties were tied of the cap were tied on the character's chest, because they had them uncut. They just went and bought ties and had them uncut on her chest. And I said, well, that actually means something from a moral and social standpoint. So could you please tie them, because that means something different?
Oh, my.
There's a lot of inferences and sort of spiritual meaning to everything that an Amish woman wears. And I was educating the art department right until the last comp of the cover.
That's fabulous that they let you see them, because so often they don't, and it could have been disastrous.
Well, when I wrote for Harlequin, here I had this book about a cocaine investigation, and the characters are on the cover having a pillow fight. I'm like, A, this never happened in the story, and B, what is that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Harlequin, bless their hearts.
Another reader wants to know how we feel if we find editing errors after the book is out.
Well, again, at Hachette, their process was so good, and their production editing department was so highly qualified that when I read the galleys and I marked the galleys, I'm a proofreader by trade, so I did a really close job. And as far as I know, we are error-free in those books. But Harlequin, on the other hand, they put out so many books that they can't possibly catch everything. And I would do my best to catch stuff in galleys, particularly when they insert entire paragraphs of text. But sometimes,
really?
Yeah.
Ooh.
So yeah, sometimes in the Harlequin books, stuff got by simply because the speed was so intense that you didn't have time for carefulness.
My second book had a hero who was Irish, and I had been in Ireland, and I had, with permission, taped people's conversations, just ordinary conversations, to get the rhythm, to be able to use the word placement and the rhythm to convey the accent, without Faith and Begorra and that sort of stuff. And I had been very careful about that. And a copy editor changed almost all of it to Americanized.
Oh no.
And it's only my second book, but I still said, no, this cannot be. And I got most of it back, but it did leave some errors because of the volume of changes.
Good gravy. That's like when you just set the whole book and go back to the beginning.
Yeah. Well, it's hard because, they do catch things and you want those caught, but you also don't want massive changes when you and the editor have worked through and everything is good. And so, and I am an editor by trade in newspapers, and you're not supposed to do that.
Exactly.
It's hard. It is hard. You want that good edit, but you want that good edit, period. And I think a really good editor has to be a chameleon and to to enter into what the story is and what the author is writing and make improvements as a chameleon and not as with a really different voice. So
Yeah.
it's a tough job. Wow.
Yeah.
When you were younger, did you have things that you worried about that really bothered you and now you look back and now you don't it doesn't bother you and you look back and you think, you know, why'd I waste my time?
Hmm. I was a bullied child because I was really smart, and when you win the academic award 3 years running at your junior high, you have no friends and no social life.
Oh.
So, looking back, I would say to my younger self, hey, let haters gonna hate and just let it roll off you and you do you. But back then, you don't really have the courage to do you because you depends on everyone around you.
I have read in places that perhaps one of the worst things we do is putting kids, adolescents in particular, all together in like junior high schools and high schools, where for most of history, people that age were apprentices and they were, there'd be a few of them, but there would also be a lot of adults. And now instead we take them, we sort of put them in a Lord of the Flies island,
Situation.
and it can get pretty grueling there.
It can. There's
That
a reason I've never been back to my high school reunions.
oh, it makes good fodder for stories later on, right?
It really, really does. In fact, I did a 6-book YA series, and I made the characters, beautiful and successful, but they still had things they had to overcome, and bullying was one of those things, and being gaslighted by your boyfriend, and I made life just as miserable.
Do you ever have dreams about those times? Do you have the classic, walking into a classroom and not being ready type dreams, or do you have other kinds?
I have those dreams as a teacher now, like because I up until
Oh.
recently have been teaching at the grad school level in an MFA program, and I do dream about getting there and having no computer and no binder.
Having to wing it, huh?
Oh, the
Okay,
horror.
I have this strange little desert island in my head where you're gonna be stuck, but you got to bring 3 movies with you, and there's some sort of facility to be able to play those 3 movies, but only those 3 movies forevermore. So which 3?
Okay, by movies, can I have series?
You writers, I'm excluding myself from this. Cheat, cheat, cheat. But yes, others that have cheated, so yes, you may.
Okay, so the A&E version from the 90s of Pride and Prejudice with Colin Firth,
Oh, yes.
all 6 seasons of Longmire, and the entire Star Wars epic 9 episodes. Thank you very much.
Boy, you cheated so badly.
I'm going
But
to be
now,
there for a long time. Come on.
okay, but what's the connector among those?
Oh my goodness. Other than fabulous production values and amazing costumes and terrific imagination and plots.
So I wanted to ask you, well, start with a reader question. It's a question that we get a lot as authors, but I love the way she asks it. She says, "Where do your stories come from? I know one author who dreams her stories, another has a character suddenly taking up residence in her head. So how are your beautiful stories born?"
They are born with a flash. It's kind of like the Big Bang
Hmm.
Theory. There's an image that just comes into my head with a character and a situation. For instance, for Lady of Devices, there was an image of a girl in a steam vehicle being robbed outside of a train, the underground station in Whitechapel. And I'm like, okay, why is a rich girl in Whitechapel? What is that
Mm.
machine she's driving? And who are these street children that are pulling everything apart and clunking her on the head? And so to answer those questions, I had to go and find out. That's where it started.
Can you trace back what might have instigated that flash?
I had been thinking about steampunk, and I'd been thinking about the fish out of water story because that's one of my
Mm.
favorites. I grew up in a plain community, so going to a public high school, I was always the fish out of water. And so that's one of my favorite themes. And so I'm thinking, okay, rich girl in the streets of London. How does she get into the streets of London? She's very talented, untrained engineer. How is that going to be a liability in her rich world and yet a total benefit in the world of the streets? And then that's where I had a story.
And we have not talked too much about your Amish. You said you were raised in a plain community. Is that where the desire to write those books came from, you think?
Well, actually, Hachette, which was my publisher at the time, they were looking for an Amish author. And I'm like, are you kidding? They're like 6 inches deep on the ground around here. But they were looking for a specific kind of Amish author. And my editor said, why aren't you writing these books? You were raised plain. And I said, well, I don't really want to go back there in my head. And she said,
Mm.
money and six figures. And I said, okay, I'm going. So that was how that started.
And what kind of stories are those then?
Well, the first trilogy I proposed to her over a salad. It's three friends who are working on a quilt through three books, and it's one is a widow, and one is a spinster, and one is a married woman who is infertile, and the various challenges of life. But the
Mm.
central theme that ties these three women together is that they are sort of quilting sisters, and they have quilting frolics and talk about what's important to them and help each other through these sort of life-changing moments. And it really resonated with readers because the female
Uh,
friendships were the center of the story. And I think that's the case for lots of women. It's our female friendships that get us through.
that's wonderful. That's wonderful. I do empathize with you. The something that you have lived is not always really appealing to write about in fiction.
So I sort of
I think,
translated it a little bit.
yeah, well, that makes sense. I'm thinking both people encouraged me, editors, when I was traditionally published. So, oh, why don't you set a book at the Washington Post? And at that time I was writing romance and I was working at the Washington Post, and it is not romantic. But maybe with enough distance someday.
Yeah,
Um,
that distance is very helpful.
I'll bet. I'll bet.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have this flash, or you have this, a concept. Then, how do you take it from there to being a book? Because as writers, we know you get a lot of ideas, and more ideas than there are books. So there's a process going from the idea to having a complete book. And what is yours?
I have two tools that help me. One of them is what I call placemat plotting. My girlfriends supply me with paper placemats from restaurants that they swipe so that I can plot and do my mind maps and do like literal maps of landscape and mountains and rivers and stuff, because some of these steampunk books take place on a whole continent. And so I'm drawing pictures to keep my mind straight. So that there's that tool, the placemats. And then the second tool is Blake Snyder's beat sheet.
Mm.
Out of his Save the Cat books, if I can come up with a plot that kind of follows the beat sheet, then I know I have a complete book. Because I'm an outliner, I do all this stuff in advance.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yep, yep.
So you will go through those processes with the placemats and with the beat sheet,
Yep.
and then you'll do a complete outline?
Yes, I do it well. The beat sheet is the outline, and then
Oh, okay. Okay.
because he has this thing called I think it's the opening scene or something. That is not the flash, but it's Jenny Cruzy used to say, start where the trouble starts. So the day that everything changes, that's like chapter 1, page 1.
And do you write from chapter 1, page 1 all the way through?
Yep.
What's the best part of the process for you? What's the most fun or the easiest?
The 2 words, the end. The most fun, the part that gets my heart rate up and my hands tingling is that sort of creative work with the placemats and the outline. I love that part.
And do you go back to those placemats then throughout the book, or once you kind of, it sounds almost like you then translate the placemats into the outline.
Well, the placemats are pictorial almost. They're, personal relationships. Here's the heroine, here's her parents, here's her friends. How are they all connected? What's the landscape that they're in? What does the house look like? What are the layouts of the rooms in case things happen inside the house? That kind of thing is all sort of, I'm a very visual person. So here's all these visuals. And then I'm also a very orderly person. So here's the Blake Snyder's beat sheet. So those 2 halves of my brain reach synthesis, and then I start writing.
And you know all that before you write.
Yep, I have to. I will not be painted into a corner by my own brain.
See, my brain would go through all that process and then say, "Okay, that story's told. Let's go play with something else."
Well, see, my brain knows it hasn't been told because the Word document is still open with chapter 1 at the top. And it's like, get on with it.
Yeah, I have to get to a certain point. I do this. I just write what I know out of sequence. I sometimes have a vague idea what order stuff is going in. So those things I put in order that I can see where they're going to go. And there'll be big gaps and there'll be dot, 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 and need something here, dot, 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 and keep going. And I get usually about a third of the way through the book, sometimes a little more. And I kind of run out of steam. But I've got enough down then that I feel guilty if I don't complete it. Those characters are walking and talking and living and breathing, and I got to get them out and get their stories told.
Exactly. Somebody asked me once, how do you know when a book is done? And I said, when they stop talking.
Don't they ever stop talking to you, though, in the middle? Like if you get stuck, what do you do if you get stuck?
Well, I don't, because I have this outline.
Do you ever get stuck making the outline?
Once in a while, but usually not for more than like a day or 2, because I usually set aside a week or 5 days to get that creative work done. And I walk around the yard and I hang out with the chickens, and my brain is always working. And usually when you're in the shower, the big aha hits and you got no pencil.
This is another reader question, and I love it. The reader asks if when we finish a book, do we miss the characters and think about them after? And I love this so much because clearly the reader does after she finishes reading.
Oh, absolutely. I do miss the characters. I miss being friends with them and sitting in the parlor drinking tea and hearing about their adventures. That's a good reason to have a spin-off series. So that's finally where I wound up.
Going to ask. So with the Amish stories, you conceived initially of the three women and the 3 books. And then did you have a spin-off from that?
I did, because I wanted to write a book about a herbal healer. They call them, in the Amish culture, they call them Dr. Fra, the doctor woman.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to have this character, which meant then I had to go and take 6 weeks of herbal medicine classes. And I wrote, the way I pitched it to my editor was, this book is on 2 levels. There is the herb that the Dr. Fra uses to cure the physical ailment, and the herb has a spiritual element to it, and God cures the spiritual element. So the books were always working on 2 levels, and it was a lot of fun.
Wow. And did that become more than one book, or you have the one book? What's the title of that?
It was a trilogy. It's called the Healing Grace Trilogy. And for instance, the first book is called Herb of Grace, which is, and all the titles were the country names of these herbs. So the Herb of Grace is rue. So she's treating a stomach complaint with rue. And at the same time, the patient is rueing a bad decision that he made earlier in his life that has to be cured.
That's great.
So my editor loved this, and there was another 3-book deal.
And that came out of the initial 3 books.
It did. I had populated my little county, Windberg Township, with enough people that I could get away with this, and characters cross over into the various books. And now the series is up to 8 books, with the 9th coming, and the characters are still crossing around into each other's lives.
That's terrific. Now, do you find you have totally different readership for the steampunk and the Amish stories?
Completely different. Yeah, that's why they're under 2 separate names. Adina Senft writes the Amish stuff, and Shelley Adina writes the steampunk.
I wonder, I bet there are readers out there who read both.
I don't know. From reader letters, it doesn't seem so, but it would be great if there was.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Okay, talk about reader letters. What sort of interaction do you get?
Everything from, please don't let Lady Claire get married because I want to imagine her as mine, to I really appreciate the female friendships in these Amish books. It makes me value my own friendships. To things like, the process by which your character came out of this toxic religion is the same process that I'm going to use because I need to leave. Like, that letter reduced me to tears.
Wow. Yes.
So it runs the whole gamut.
That's amazing. And it is so interesting that people can find answers in fiction.
Yeah.
That help them live their lives and heal.
A story question is often a life question. So, yeah, I think I used to look into fiction trying to find a mirror that would reflect me back to me. So it's no wonder that other readers do.
Well, this may be too nosy, but was that in your childhood because you felt there weren't other people having the life that you had?
Kind of, yeah. I was looking for friends in books and looking for experiences that were sort of like mine that would help me, have the guts to do something. And eventually I did. Fiction is a wonderful thing. It's more than just entertainment, I think.
I do too. For one thing, I think it lets you experience other people's lives in a way that encourages empathy.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
And that you're doing it so wholeheartedly, and because reading is interactive, as the reader, you're really imbuing a lot of yourself into it, and then it comes back to you much more than passively watching a show. Although I love stories and movies and TV shows too.
But reading is different. Yeah, it occupies a different place in the brain, I think, and the center where you learn empathy, you learn sort of to predict the future. Okay, if character does this and this, then the consequences might be this. For a child to learn that in particular, that there's consequences to decisions, that's huge.
That's a great point and a great reason to teach writing, and particularly writing fiction in school. So, do you think that writers look at the world differently from most people?
I think we do, don't we? Not just
we're weird. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, not just from sort of the standpoint that, oh, I want to take that chunk of that person's life and give it to a character, or I want to take this girl's curly red hair and give it to a character. It's more than that. It's like, here's a situation, here's a person in it. She's got 3 choices. what one will she choose? Which will make the best conflict in my story? And how can I make her sympathetic? Like that's hard. That's where the art of it comes in. And it's more than just appearance. It's life choices. It's,
Mm.
baggage and past and decision making, and the greatest conflict is often internal, and experimenting with that. That's the meaty part that I love.
Yes. I was actually flying to San Francisco for that conference. I was sitting next to a gentleman and we were having a really interesting conversation. He is a college professor. And he had heard somewhere there was group of professors and they were talking about what do people most need to learn. And the first person who answered said the most important things for people to learn are critical thinking and empathy,
Mm.
and that you have to have both of them. And everybody else said, yeah, what she said. And then the more you think about it, the more it covers so much of you need in life to be a good person and to live a good life.
And to
And I
have a society that functions.
Yes. Yep.
And to have those children learning those things in their books right from the beginning, I think is, yeah, maybe it's a little subversive, but also it helps them see maybe something is different in my family, and let's talk to mom and dad about this.
Well, and I was thinking that as authors, as we can as much as we can convey the importance of critical thinking and compassion,
Mhm.
we can do our little bit to help help the world along,
Exactly.
along with the therapy I get from killing off people who have annoyed me, fictionally killing off people who have annoyed me. So,
Yeah, there's a little bit of that too.
how do you approach research, and when in the process do you do it? And does it vary from, I'm piling on questions here, does it vary from the Amish stories and the steampunk stories?
Actually, no, I use the same process for both because I'm I'm a feet on the ground researcher. I like to be there in the environment, seeing how the buildings are situated, seeing what plants are growing in the meadows, seeing what's blooming in people's gardens at certain times of year. I'm a massive photographer, so I photograph everything and bring it back and use those as references. I begin, of course, like many people do, with Google and Google Earth and fly over the places that I want for my settings. But then there's something about feet on the ground. So I've been to London numerous times. I've been
Mm.
to Alberta, which is where some of the places in my steampunk stories are set. I've been in, the Wild West. This summer, we're going to do a little research trip out to a ghost town that's in the second or third book in my mystery series. So I like the feet on the ground. I like the museum bookstore that has books where you
Oh,
can't get
yes.
anything else. I
Yes,
like
yeah, yeah.
the Mennonite Historical Society in Lancaster has, the Ausbund, the Amish hymn book, so I can take lines from the Amish hymn book and work them into the theme of the plot. And you just can't buy the Ausbund on Amazon.
Really? I'm surprised
No,
you can't.
you can't. It's the one thing Amazon doesn't stock.
But I totally agree with you about museums, especially the little small museums, and
Yeah,
they'll have booklets or something like put together by
local
a local
historian.
yeah, yeah, I love those. I was
They're
just
worth their
reading
weight in gold.
I was just reading about the history of Kentucky the other day, and an early settler's son was kidnapped by Indians when he was 9 years old, and he eventually he had really tough couple of years, and he was a slave basically, and then he was adopted by an Ottawa woman, and that was much better. But as you read, and he eventually wrote a history of his life, but he was so clearly caught between the two cultures and
Mm,
never totally part of either one,
right.
his whole life. his whole life. I thought how sad that was
But you
for him.
have there the basics of a character, a
Oh
very
yeah.
conflicted character
Oh yeah.
with fabulous information.
And the interesting thing to me about that was I think about him in particular, but there's also that conflict, that internal conflict can be expressed in so many other ways. The empathy that I had for that character, you could apply to many other the characters in other situations. Anyhow,
Exactly.
so research I love. Now you said though that your steampunk has covered a continent,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
How did that come about?
My brain. So she's fleeing the man who wants to marry her in an airship, and she winds up in eh, visiting friends in Edmonton in the Canadas, which, Edmonton is the kind of place it's like 30 below in the winter and it's very flat. And my mom used to live there, and there's not a lot to do in Edmonton. So I flipped that on its head and I called it the Northern Light and gave it an enviable society and a governor who would throw these amazing parties. And it's very close to the diamond mines, and so there were diamonds. And so okay, so here was this one location, and then the sort of the capital of the Texican territories, which reaches from the Canadian border down to Mexico, is Santa Fe, one of my favorite towns ever. And so the stories are set in Santa Fe. And then there's this town called Resolution, which is set in the middle of a floodplain on purpose so that people won't come there. And this air pirate has his headquarters there. So there's Resolution. And then we move out to the Californias, and it's, the California people are trying to get their lands back. And so there's going to be a war. And it's just like it goes on and never stops.
And you've been to all these places, or because it's alternate history, are you
Oh,
alternating the
I've been to
geology or the geography as well?
Oh no, I've been to them all. You
Good
bet.
for you. That's terrific. So this applies to each of these genres that you're talking about. Oh, wait a minute. You mentioned mysteries too. So where are the mysteries fitting in?
Oh, the mysteries. They're really fun because I set them in my favorite places. In fact, The Bride Wore Constant White, which is book one of Mysterious Devices, is set in Georgetown, Colorado, where I went to a conference last year and fell in love
Oh,
with the
it's
place
cool.
and
Yeah.
its history. And I'm like, I'm totally setting this book here.
So the mysteries are steampunk.
Yes,
Okay.
they're a spin-off from Magnificent Devices, and the characters cross over.
That's cool.
Mhm.
Now, with steampunk and with the Amish, are there things that people think about these genres that they think they know that they're usually wrong about?
Um, well, steampunk, I think people it's very heavily influenced by the British Empire and colonialization. So that's what people think of as steampunk, but there is some amazing stuff coming out of writers of color like the Southeast Asia and the islands of the South Seas and Africa and India. And I love reading these books because they're so different. In fact, when Black Panther came out
Uh-huh.
and the civilization was clearly not influenced by colonialism, there was like a cheer because it's like, okay, this is what we do in our books. So there's that on the steampunk side. And then on the Amish side, people are sort of what they know about the Amish is that they don't use electricity and they drive a horse and buggy and they speak a dialect of German. And often that's all that people realize. But there's a whole spiritual undercurrent that determines these visual things that outsiders see. And the spiritual undercurrent, which is what I learned growing up playing, is kind of what I try to bring out in my fiction, because that's what's causing all these exterior symptoms. And that's the part that people don't see.
That's great. That's great. I also wanted to go back on the steampunk because you said to me at another time, and it really clicked for me, that a lot of that example of steampunk is the old TV series Wild Wild West.
Yep.
And I was surprised when you talked about British Empire, because I so much think of it as connected to the U.S. and the Wild Wild West, and also there was the 1876 Exposition, and there's still a building from it at the National Mall in Washington D.C., and that was very much a looking forward era and emphasis.
Yep. Yep. So that the Wild West is kind of there again. There's that subversive element. You could leave your past behind and remake yourself and present yourself as a different person in the West, where you were sort of bound by your family and their connections and your social rank, and in the East. And so there's the whole technological side, which these expositions really brought out. And then there's the social side, which is pretty easily subverted if you bring your character into the Wild West, which is why I like setting them out here, is because there's that sense of possibility.
Yes, absolutely. I like that too. And in the modern West, there's still a lot of that you can start over, and who you are here is what you're going to be judged on.
Not who you were back there.
Yeah, or who your family was.
Exactly.
I once did, that character who was Irish, I interviewed modern day Irish immigrants to get an idea of why somebody would move. And this guy I talked to, who was wonderful, and he'd had this really good job. He was born in Ireland. He was working in London, had a good job. He gave it up. He came to the US. He was living in Chicago, and when he told me where he was initially living, I was like, ugh. And working 3 jobs to put himself through college, and so he basically did a huge step back to reset. And when I met him, he was doing well, but I said, "Why would you do that?" And he said, "You Americans do not understand the weight of the past." Yeah. And he was talking about, being brought up where what your father did was what you did, what your ancestors were was what you were. And it really had a lot of impact on me. It's something.
Yeah, because that's almost a foreign concept to us out here, but we all are, basically the children of immigrants, and this is probably what our ancestors had to deal with.
And in so few words, he put a really powerful concept into my head. So, okay, I have another question from a reader. This is one of my very favorites. If you could write a book with any author, alive or dead, who would you want to work with, and why?
Oh my goodness. The canvas of that question is so vast. I don't know where to dab my little paintbrush. I think it would be a toss-up between Jane Austen and Gail Carriger.
Wow. Okay. And why?
Well, I think we should do a trilogy. I think the 3 of us should just all get together and work on a trilogy together, and we would have more fun than is legal, probably. It's just because Jane Austen for her social observation, Gail for her humor and her ability to turn expectations upside down. I think I find those very fun to think about.
Those are terrific. Okay. Another reader wants to know where you work and if you have an inspirational view. And I will add on to that, what's your routine if you have one?
I have a very strict routine that kind of makes people. Yes. It makes people blink and go, but you're supposed to be creative. Well, that helps me be creative. I'm kind of like one of my chickens. I need structure in the day in order to be productive.
to lay an egg.
So well, yeah, they lay an egg and I lay stories. So from 8 till 9, it's coffee and email. I kiss my husband goodbye at 9, and from 9 till noon, I do PR and accounting and those sort of left brain things. Noon to 1, I let the chickens out and we all ramble around the yard and let our minds expand. And from 1 to 4 are my writing hours, and they are sacred. If you come to the door between those hours, you'll get no answer. And then I knock off about 5. The chickens and I come back outside, and then we make dinner and we have the evening together. That's the shape of my
And
day.
you do that, do you do that 7 days a week, or do you give yourself a day off?
I schedule a day off when I think I need it, or when there's like a sale at Kate Spade or someplace. And yeah, pretty much 7 days a week.
So when do you do things
And
like
I
go to
do.
the grocery store and
Oh, Sweetie does that.
oh, that's lovely.
And we don't have kids, so that takes an entire element out of this writing life that most women have to
But
deal
you do
with.
have things, even if he's doing that, there are things you've got to do. I always find this so disruptive and irksome. Appointments, the dentist, the
We'll see.
dermatologist, the doctor, things that
We
you
live
actually have to
way
do.
out of town. We live way out of town in the woods, and so when we go to town, we stack all our appointments on the same day.
Ah.
Because it takes a lot to get there, and you just don't want to waste a whole day doing this multiple times a week. So they get stacked. I usually know far enough in advance, and I just put them all on the same day and only go to town once.
I'm plotting how I can do all my appointments on one day. Once a year.
Well, it's just efficient.
Okay, but you didn't say where you work. Do you have an inspirational view?
No, my office is on the north side of the house, which is, according to feng shui, not the creative area. My creative area is on the south side of the house where the deck is. So if I'm not outside, like if the weather's horrible, then I'm on the inside of that wall in the same spot. And that's where I write. The creativity area of the bagua, the feng shui bagua, is where I naturally gravitate to write, on the south side of the house.
Why don't you move your office there?
Because the house is already built.
Uh-huh.
And that's where the living room is.
So you'll do your other kind of work in your office, and then you'll gravitate there to write? Interesting.
Yeah, it was, and I was doing that before I even read this nifty little book called Move Your Stuff, Change Your Life.
I think I have that book. One of the things I liked about it is it said you didn't have to believe in it for it to work.
Yeah. Because it's like the complete antithesis of how I was brought up, but it really does work.
I'm not so sure it works, but I like that you could be a skeptic, and they said it would still work because what. Well, that's I won't. As one of the things that really bothers me a lot about these, The Secret and all that, and
Oh, I don't
well,
do. I've
if
never
it
read that
doesn't,
one.
they say if it doesn't work, it's because you didn't really believe. And I'm like,
Okay, that's
that's a
toxic.
con man's answer, because
It's also toxic religion's answer. If you not believing, it's always your
it's
fault.
always your fault. Yeah.
Yeah. And stuff doesn't happen because it's your fault. Well, I wrote that out of my life. That has been cut and excised from my life.
Wow, good for you. That must take a lot of strength to do. So I have high respect for that. So, okay, we're going to shift back to books. Somebody who's brand new to you, hasn't read any of your books, where's a good place for them to start?
Well, the steampunk begins with Lady of Devices. It's always good to start a massive epic on the day that the trouble started.
Yeah.
And it's that's like 55K. So it's free if you're reading digitally. So it's an easy way to enter the world. Great. And the Amish begins with The Wounded Heart. And 8 books later, we're still working in Windward Township. And I also moved it out to Colorado as well, because there's an Amish community out there.
Do you find that when you're working on one kind of one series versus another series, does it have any impact on your outlook and mood?
No, because I like being in both those worlds. And the language that I use is so completely different in each world that I never get them mixed up.
Do you do anything to trigger? Like, do you listen to music when you write, or
No, never.
never? Okay.
It just happens when I read, like I read the previous day's work, and that just sort of throws me back into the fictive dream, and off I go.
Good for you. Okay, how about, do you have any books that you would consider sort of overlooked, that they just haven't gotten the readership that you wish they would, and you feel sorry for these little books and want to encourage people to read them?
Oh my. Well, there's some pretty eclectic taste. I did a 4-book series called the Smoke River series, which is about a plain community that's not Amish, but it's about women coming out of toxic religion. So Adina Senft has those. And Shelley Adina has a Mennonite vampire that she would love for people to read.
A Mennonite vampire. Okay, people. Okay, readers, you got to get that one. That sounds amazing.
Immortal Faith is what it's called.
Ah, there we go.
Because, if you were a vampire looking for a community that was kind of like how it was when you died 200 years before, where would you go?
Yeah, not to Las Vegas. So
Right. Go to Pennsylvania. And you'd hook up with a Mennonite girl who has never heard of vampires, and you'd live the Mennonite life quite happily until.
and all right. I think we're going to get some readers for that one.
I hope so.
So, have I skipped any questions you would like to answer, or are there anything you would like to tell us that I haven't asked you about?
Oh, golly. I think we pretty much covered a very wide-ranging group of topics. I do want to say thank you to the readers who wrote questions, because they were great questions.
Yeah, they are. And I hope readers will ask more. You can send them to podcast@authorslovereaders.com. So we'd love to have more questions. And tell readers how they can find out more about you. Do you have 2 separate websites for those 2 names that you mentioned?
I used to have 4, but now we have only 1.
Yay!
ShelleyAdina.com, Shelley with an EY like the poet, or AdinaSenft.com. They will both bring you to the same place, and you can pick a genre, whichever you like. There's YA, contemporary romance, Amish, and of course the steampunk. Click the button and it takes you to the books that are in that genre.
And we will have those links in the show notes for people to make that a little bit easier. And now we come to the either or rapid fire questions. So we'll finish up here with a bang. And I'll give you an easy one to start. Appetizer or dessert?
Appetizer.
Well, but you're still going to get some dessert. So ice cream or cake?
Ice cream.
Opera or show tunes?
Show tunes.
Day or night?
Day.
Paper plates or best china?
Best china.
Pickup or sports car?
Pickup, definitely. I have chickens. Need hay.
They could sit next to you in the sports car.
No.
Hiking boots or cowboy boots?
Hiking boots.
Spring or fall?
Fall.
Cruise or trekking vacation?
Neither. Good Lord.
Yes, you have to pick one. Gonna make you go on one.
Oh, trekking vacation.
Okay. Hot air balloon or train trip?
Both.
I thought you were going to be really good at the either or, Shelley. I thought you would stick with it. I should have known better. I don't think we've had one person yet make it all the way through. Daisies or roses?
Roses.
Cat or dog?
Cat.
And you didn't say chickens. Good for you.
Yes, sorry.
House decorating or gardening?
House decorating. Don't have a garden.
Paint or wallpaper?
Paint.
That's a litmus test for me. People who say wallpaper get lectures about how I had to chip wallpaper off inch by inch in various houses. So, coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Winter Olympics or Summer Olympics?
Winter.
Nail polish or bare nails?
Bare nails, of course.
And this is the last one. Grab the best first or save the best for last?
Oh, grab the best first.
Ooh, I caught her on the last one. Shelley, thank you so much. I'm so glad we got to be able to do this. And I know that the readers and the listeners enjoyed it. And for you listeners out there, I wish you the very best week of reading ahead and hope you'll come back next week and find out about another author and their stories behind the stories. That's the show for this week. Hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for joining Authors Love Readers podcast. Remember, you can always find out more about our guest authors in the show notes, and you can find out more about me at www.patriciamclinn.com. You can also send in questions to be asked of future authors at podcast@authorslovereaders.com. Until next week, wishing you lots of happy reading. Bye.